Good morning. Welcome to the closing session of TNC 2012. My name is Miroslav Milinovic. I'm Terena Vice President for Conferences, and it's my pleasure to chair this final session of this year's TNC annual event. Our last keynote is Leslie Daigle from Internet Society, and I think that we don't need a special introduction. Leslie is currently acting as a CTO for ISOC, but has been in this community for a number of years and has contributed to the IATF and ISOC a lot. My personal first touch was with the Whois++ standard a number of years ago. And without further ado, please, Leslie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And good morning. So, a couple words about the Internet Society. The Internet Society is a global not-for-profit organization made up of a number of hundreds of organizations and tens of thousands of individual members around the globe who are united by the belief that the Internet can and should be for everyone. The Internet Society was founded 20 years ago. One of the organizations that was supportive of its creation was RARE, an ancestor of Terena. And in fact, that meant that Kees Neggers was one of our founding board members. And we certainly join in congratulating Kees, thank him for all the work that he's done, and wish him all the best in his retirement. So, the Internet Society believes that the Internet has overall been a very positive force for change in the world, whether as a platform for innovation, economic growth, for creative expression, and driving social progress. So in that light, we think that it's important that everybody continue to be able to use the Internet. And a lot of what we get called upon to do is to bridge the gap between what's happening in the policy world and what's happening in the technology world. Certainly for myself, I prefer to hang out in the technology world, but both technology and policy are evolving rapidly these days. And I think we have to acknowledge that no longer is it the case that the Internet is really shaped only by our good technical ideas. Rather, it evolves in response to stimuli, and those stimuli are coming as much from the policy world these days as it does from the technical world and our new ideas and things that we'd like to play with and things that we would like to dream up for the future. So there are a lot of things going on, whether it's because of policies and regulations. At the end of this year, there is an international treaty conference that will be discussing the future of telecom regulations and whether telecom regulations should include the Internet. There are a lot of governments that are waking up and saying, hey, this is an important part of our citizens' daily lives, so what should that mean in terms of their experience of the Internet? And of course, there's lots of commercial pressures as companies have great new ideas and want to race to be the biggest, best, and fastest. So how do we actually want to think about all of these different pressures and stimuli that are playing out on the Internet? I mean, it's an awful lot of stuff that's happening, an awful lot of new ideas coming along that our first reactions might be, ugh, how could you possibly think that? But at a certain point, you have to get beyond just saying, well, I don't like that because it's not the way I ever did it, and really get a grasp on, is this or is this not going to move the Internet forward? So for a long time, we talked about the importance of the end-to-end principle, which, you know, in a lot of ways, I could still stand up here and say the end-to-end principle is paramount for the Internet. But there are a lot of voices that come along and say, yeah, but we've had NATs for years and somehow we've survived. There is no such thing as an end anymore. So clearly that doesn't define the Internet anymore. And then what? End of discussion? So what are the ways in which we can really think about things as being not just a good idea or a bad idea, we like it, we don't like it. What are the things that actually characterize how the Internet has always been? So we sat down with some other bright folk and thought it through and came up with a list of things that we perceive to be invariant features of the internet, things that were more or less true 40 years ago, things that we hope are still true 40 years from now. 8 principles. I don't like to call them principles. There's so many principles in the world. That's why we have this kind of ugly word, invariance. So 8 invariants that really do characterize the things that we have experienced, whether we were playing around with the internet 20, 40 years ago. Things that we actually think are important enough to preserve about the internet that if these are challenged, then that defines a battle that's worth fighting. Similarly, as we look at new technologies and figure out how should we pursue them, we should look at the ones that are most aligned with these. So, just a bit of a brief sidebar. I mentioned policy at the beginning of this talk, and certainly there are increasing numbers of things that are coming up in policymakers' minds that touch the internet. In the US recently, there was a whole furor over the SOPA and PIPA proposed laws, which basically defined that it would be required of ISPs in the United States to not serve DNS responses for certain domain names, for certain websites that were determined to be carrying content that is considered protected by IPR laws in the US. In other words, somebody in the US had determined that they carried content considered illegal in the US. And the requirement was that the ISP would fail to serve a DNS response for those domains. So from my perspective, the real problem is whoever taught a senator how to spell DNS. I mean, it's the wrong thing to be talking about. You can't really sit down with a legislator in any country and explain to them, well, this is how the DNS works. This is what a DNS packet looks like. This is what it does to DNSSEC if you do that, and really expect them to have the same kind of aha conclusion and say, oh, right, we shouldn't do this. Because if you do, you may succeed in convincing them that you're very upset, that there's something very wrong, but they'll turn around and say, okay, well, how about what can we do with BGP? It's not a winning situation. We really need a different language in which to talk about what's important about the internet. So in some ways, and that's where the building blocks invariant comes from, in some ways the problem with the SOPA and PIPA laws was that they not only did they break the internet today, but they broke DNS in the sense that there were certain things that you expect about DNS that would no longer be true. You could no longer just assume that you were going to get a response for every request that you make for a legitimate domain. It's sort of like taking a saw and sawing the corners off of all of your little Lego blocks. You can't build the same sets of things. So how do we come up with terminology to talk about these things and talk about what really matters for the internet in ways that will make sense so you can actually have a dialogue with policymakers. So I'm not suggesting that these 8 invariants are exactly the words to use, but I am proposing that if we can look at how the internet has evolved in the light of these characteristics, if we can look at it through this lens, maybe we will collectively come up with a better way of sharing amongst ourselves what's important and not just thumb wrestle over, I like my technology better than yours, and also find a way to talk more openly about where is this overall internet going. Because the internet is at a very serious crossroads. There are increasing pressures to essentially have the internet's boundaries somehow magically align with national boundaries. I mean, from our perspective, from having set up networks that are intentionally ignoring regional boundaries, that sounds kind of foolish. You don't really want to stop at a national boundary and then jump onto another network. You don't want to require that you architect your networks that way for a number of good technical reasons. But at the same time, policymakers are standing there and saying, well, I need to protect the rights of my citizens, and therefore I need to write laws that I can have implemented in the scope of all the internet that is rooted in my region. I mean, the kinds of things that drive that sort of stuff include sort of natural network architectures mean, for instance, that a lot of Canada's traffic routes through the US. It's sort of natural, normal, and partly a consequence of the fact that Canada has not really got a very great IXP infrastructure. But But think about what that means. That means that a lot of Canada's traffic in clear text flows through the US, where the US may or may not have laws regarding capturing data and reviewing clear text information passed on the internet. So from a Canadian perspective, the Canadian government might look and say, well, why in heaven's name would we want to have our citizens' perfectly rational traffic exposed to the rules of another government? So let's have national boundaries. So let's look at what that actually means in terms of these invariants. So if we implemented, and we could implement, just set up networks such that all of the edge routers were somehow magically aligned with national boundaries, here are some of the impacts. And I'm not even going to talk about this in terms of specific technology. If we have national boundaries, then the whole notion of whether you are allowed to do something or not, whether you can just hook up to the internet or not, becomes an awful lot more easily regulable, and it's an awful lot more easy to say, well, in this country, you can stand up a web server if this, that, or the other. In this country, you can hook up a new server to the internet if you pay us a licensing fee, so on and so forth. And ultimately, you wind up with a highly balkanized internet. And so playing that out 20 years from now, the threat or concern is that we wind up with some of these 8 invariants no longer being applicable. So maybe we don't have a permissionless innovation-based internet anymore. Maybe it's not so much about the collaboration, or collaboration is more or less constrained to regions. And I mean, from my perspective, that certainly seems like a huge step backwards, and I hope that we can agree on that to a certain level. And I think that it really does challenge where we could actually go in terms of seeing a whole lot more innovation and development, not only of the internet, but on the internet. So what kind of innovation are we talking about? Maybe we should go back and have a little look at what's been happening in the internet over the course of the last decades. And I want to do this in the framework of just some stories about technologies and experiences that we all know about. So domain names. One of the most widely deployed technologies, the domain name system. It is a widely federated system. Anybody can stand up a domain name server. You can set up your own recursive resolver. You can set up your own server for your own domain. In fact, you should. And it turns out it's actually quite important, for instance, that ccTLDs retain control of their own servers. So, for instance, it is empowering for developing countries to come along and maintain control over running their own ccTLD domain server, because it really gives them a seat at the table of the internet. So unlike the history of the telecoms network, where large multinational organizations came in and said, don't worry about it, we'll run it for you, it'll all be good. Here is a technology, here is an infrastructure where everybody actually can be a first citizen on the internet. So when a ccTLD falls in Africa, bad things happen to the butterflies in Japan, or something like that. It really is a very interconnected world. So it's also a very open technology, very much a building block technology. The specification for DNS says very little about what goes into the labels. I mean, we've always understood that they're host names, but an awful lot of other stuff has been put into the labels as well, from OIDs to other labels. Some of us have even written documents to propose putting in regular expressions as part of the answer, which kind of freaks out some domain name server operators, but that's okay. So really, they're pretty, domain name system is pretty generic and pretty useful. And, it was designed for a very specific purpose, which was to get rid of the host table, and very successful in terms of resolving from host names to addresses. It's all about technology, right? But in 1995 was the beginning of real people discovering the internet and taking it out of the lab. So Pimpulse.com is not a random example. Brian Carpenter is actually the person who called it out. He said for him, that was the moment that he knew the experiment was out of the lab. When somebody thought it was valuable to register this, not just because it was their handle on Usenet, not just because it was some geeky thing, but because there actually was perceived to be economic value. That was when we knew the experiment was out of the lab. And today, maybe we consider this useful. It's sort of, this is where we've gotten to in our experience and understanding of the internet. Very different world from where we were in 1995. And there's a lot of good things that can be done with the fact that the DNS is so open and specifies simply that if you produce a label, parse it this way, you can get responses. Because it left a lot of latitude for defining internationalized domain names years after the original specification. Because, for instance, it turns out that using Harold Alvestrand's term, we're not all part of the 26 club. Not everybody can write their name in the 26 ASCII characters that are found in the first 128 bits. Perhaps you'd actually like to see your name or your company name properly represented in the DNS. So overall, again, taking a glance at the invariants, we can see that there really are things that define the DNS in terms of why it worked and why some of those closed commercial, seemingly better ideas that were fashionable a decade ago didn't. Real names might have been a good idea, but as a closed proprietary system for keywords, it didn't have anything like the scalability and the flexibility that the domain name system has. And it was never going to be the sort of building block technology that the DNS is. So again, moving along through time, email was the first killer app of the internet. But then a fresh-faced young man came along with a good idea and in Switzerland and said, maybe we really can do something more sophisticated for publishing and accessing and sharing information on the internet. And he developed the first document-oriented, well, I shouldn't say the first document-oriented. He developed the first hypertext system that has been globally deployed on the internet. We know it as the World Wide Web. Prior to that, Gopher had been kind of popular, but the World Wide Web immediately paved Gopher. You went from hierarchical system to here you can have a completely interlinked system. The World Wide Web is kind of interesting on another front as well. Around about 1989, I was interested in hypertext and hypermedia. I was following some of those conferences. And the really big question in those conferences was, hypertext and hypermedia are the way of the future, but how are we ever going to take all of this legacy text that we have, all of these books in the world, and get enough government grants, because that's the only way it'll work, government grants to transcribe all of this stuff into hypermedia? So a lot of consideration about how many compute hours it was going to take to scan and verify and link and this and that. And then along comes the World Wide Web, which we can have an argument about how well it is, how well evolved a hypermedia system it is, but built on open standards, based on collaboration between the world, and all of a sudden, most of the world's books are online. By one of the first instances of truly crowdsourcing, within 5 years of the World Wide Web hitting the world, all the major open rights texts were actually on the internet, magically enough, and you can pretty much find any text that you want. So that was really a demonstration of how very powerful this right idea at the right time, based on open software, open technologies, really could take over the world, literally. And of course, from there, we build out. The web, in fact, made it possible for people who were thinking not in technology terms, but more in terms of information terms, and information services could build out any number of other things. And Google is a funny example. I mean, Google right now is kind of synonymous with search. They've done some pretty amazing things in terms of really understanding what is it that people want when they're looking for stuff. Did you mean, whatever, and all the computing that goes into the background of what looks like what are similarities and what are the right ways to index and find stuff. But they weren't the first search engine on the net. The first search on the net was actually an index of anonymous FTP archives, Archie, which some people may remember. I see some hands raising, excellent. And I mean, the constraints there were you could only search on the name of a file that you wanted to find on some anonymous FTP server around the world. It did also provoke some of the first privacy discussions, because it turns out that some people were using anonymous FTP to share drafts of documents between people, because there weren't wikis or anything like that in those days. And some people got a little upset when their supposedly private drafts got exposed, which is what actually led to the first robots.txt, but I digress. Archie was basically overtaken by the web. It never scaled to index websites properly. But there was AltaVista. AltaVista was developed by Digital Equipment Corporation to showcase the horsepower of its mighty iron computers. So that was really big for a while. And that's what basically sort of took over Archie. But I mean, where is AltaVista now? In fact, where's DEC now? I mean, it got completely paved by Google. And here's a case where we see, again, the internet has no permanent favorites. Something that was huge and a matter of everyday life a decade ago, completely overtaken by something better. And that's actually an important principle of flexibility. So in terms of publishing, again, looking back at our invariants, again, it's the poster child for permissionless innovation and the power of that. Tim Berners-Lee did not have to ask anybody if he could develop the World Wide Web. He didn't have to ask anybody, except maybe a system administrator, if he could put up a web server. And it was the fact that he did that, he could do that, and everybody else could follow suit that actually led us to have the World Wide Web. So I mentioned that from the web, we wind up having other systems created, other uses, things that, people are inventing stuff that, we may or may not have use for, but certainly large chunks of the world do. We have Facebook now. Facebook is an important part of many people's lives. It was created by a student who violated any number of privacy laws by taking all the pictures of the folks in the dorms for the university where he was, and putting up a website to determine who was hot and who was not. That was the beginning of Facebook. I don't really think that Mark Zuckerberg could have walked into any business board and said, hey, I have this great idea for this thing I'm going to call Facebook. Will you support me and let me build this? Give me funding to build this. I don't think it's something that in 2004 any board could have perceived as having economic value or a business case. And yet, okay, it was a little shaky, but Facebook has been through its IPO. It's been one of the few things that has actually managed to successfully IPO and has demonstrable economic value at this point. And more importantly, it has actually, meant something to any number of billions of people around the world. Turns out it too can be put to interesting and other uses. If you are on the island of Grand Manan in the Bay of Fundy, I'll let you look that up on an atlas. If you want to know what's going on in the police accounts, you have to look at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's Facebook page to keep up with what they're up to. And it turns out that for any obscure hobby that you may have, you can be pretty sure that somebody else on the face of the planet has the same obscure hobby, and maybe they've already put up a website with useful information. So who knew that there are over 2 million obsessed knitters and spinners and weavers in the world? But it turns out there are, and I could probably talk for 20 minutes about that, but I know it would bore you silly, so I won't. Twitter, another fine example of if you walked into a boardroom and said, this is what I want to do, probably wouldn't have gotten an awful lot of acceptance. Who would be interested in understanding what I've had for lunch today in 140 characters or less? How is that ever going to be useful or interesting information? How is that useful? oh well, maybe it is. So the Arab Spring last year, some people have called it the Twitter revolution or the Facebook revolution. No, really not. I mean, this was people expressing what they really believed and wanted. Twitter and Facebook were, though, very important supporting technologies. It turns out that a lot of these concerns had been expressed before, but prior to Facebook and Twitter and social media that people could put their hands on, the government was actually able to dismiss any stories and discredit any stories of what was going on and thereby disband social action. But with Facebook and Twitter, people were able to express their real view and coordinate. So that's a pretty powerful impact of these technologies that are being built out on the internet in ways that we really couldn't define or expect in advance. And that is really part of the power of the internet, why it's important for it to be open, based on building block technologies, why it's important to continue to allow permissionless innovation, because we really don't know. We have no master plan for the internet, and that's a good thing, because we don't want the internet to be limited by the imaginations of some group of people, where that group of people is anything less than the population of the entire planet. So, what's bugging the internet today? What are the current stimuli for evolution of the internet? Or should I say, what are some of the current threats? So we've heard a little bit about global addressing this week. And I want to refer to it as global addressing because that's what is actually key to continuing to have global reach and integrity in the internet. I actually don't care if it's IPv4, if it's IPv6, if it's something completely different than IP. None of that matters. What does matter is that we continue to have global addressing of hosts on the internet. And right now, that is not going to be IPv4. So this graph is basically the existing growth of users of the internet and projections towards when we might see the entirety of the population of the planet on the internet. And I'm not even talking about fridges and cars or other things. The two vertical gray bars are, the first one, of course, is when the IANA free pool was exhausted, when IANA handed off the last /8s to the RIRs last year. The second gray bar is the point at which the RIRs will run out of IPv4 addresses, and then some point beyond that, ISPs are going to run out of addresses. And the key bar, the key horizontal bar there is the total number of IPv4 addresses. And I think that's a really important line because it's clear there never were enough IPv4 addresses. It doesn't matter how you conserve them. It doesn't matter how you reuse them. It doesn't matter if you pry the legacy numbers out of the cold, dead hands of companies in the United States. There aren't enough. So if we want to continue to have global addressing, we need to move to v6 because it is the only answer we have right now. Of course, the typical challenge, but there is no business case to deploy IPv6. That's because every organization is looking at it typically in terms of their tree. And deploying IPv6 really is about looking at the forest and not just your own piece of it. So I wanted to look back because, the internet, in fact, hasn't always been IPv4. There was another fairly drastic transition 30 years ago. Transition from NCP to TCP/IP, and here are some notes exchanged between John Postel and various other folk who were running the network at the time. And the interesting thing in these notes is two things. One, the transition was made by turning off NCP. They did it for 1 day, then they did it for 2 days, and then they said, that's it, you're out. We're just running IP now. That was not ever going to be a viable plan for transitioning from v4 to v6, because there is no way we can rationally tell the world, including our parents and grandparents and our fridges and telephones, you're not running IPv4 anymore. You need to be running IPv6. The other interesting thing about this exchange is a lot of the concerns are the same. There were concerns about, well, this TCP/IP stuff is really not ready for prime time. We can't possibly deploy it in time. How could we possibly do this? Yet somehow the internet survived. And if you think that v6 is not ready for prime time, there are certainly elements of truth to that. But as somebody else said this week, the only way it's going to get ready for prime time is by deploying it and working out the challenges and actually making it work. Because keeping it in the cupboard until it's ready to go is not an option. So because we believe that collaboration is really a fundamentally important thing for the Internet Society hosted the World IPv6 Day last June. And the heavy lifting was done by Google, Facebook, and Yahoo, and a number of websites that all agreed to turn on IPv6 for a day on their front door. As you may or may not know, Google had been providing IPv6 only on ipv6.google.com, and they're only to whitelisted networks. So if they didn't think you were providing adequate IPv6 coverage, they wouldn't whitelist you. And this was because, from their perspective, when they dual stacked and had both v4 and v6 active on their front door, a number of badly configured systems around the world, end users whose computers thought they had tunnels to IPv6, whether it was a crappy tunnel or a v6 connection to nowhere, would essentially experience a 40-second delay getting to the web page of Google as the computer figured out, oh, well, yeah, I thought I had a v6 connection, but I can't actually connect, so maybe I'll try this v4 thing. And that's an unacceptable user experience from the point of view of the marketing department of Google. And, face it, that's their choice. So the point of last year's event was to say, okay, what really will happen if you turn on 4 and 6 at the same time? How many users are impacted? How much? And then the other important thing was having Google, Facebook, and Yahoo jump off the bridge at the same time meant that it wasn't just going to be everyone to say, Google doesn't work today, I'll go use Yahoo. But by the time people went through Google, Yahoo, and Facebook and said, maybe it's the internet, and they would phone up their service provider and say, why is my internet broken? So it turns out, 24 hours, nothing happened. No huge mass of phone calls to ISPs. The numbers that people saw in terms of impact on their websites were acceptably low. So happily, we get to go to this year's event where this time it's for real. That's a countdown timer on the v6 launch website. This obviously is a screenshot from a couple of days ago, but we are counting down to the point where the v6 launch participants will go live. So what we have here is a number of content providers, access providers, and equipment vendors who have stepped up and said, we're willing to commit to IPv6 deployment, and by the 6th of June, we're going to make some significant commercial, visible things come true. And so these are the list of the commitments. In terms of websites, with Google, Facebook, and Yahoo and their properties, we basically have the top 4 Alexa websites that will be IPv6 enabled by the 6th of June. Facebook has already jumped. By some measures, some campus networks are looking at this and thinking, looking at the way our traffic goes, that means that about 50% of our traffic is going to be over IPv6 after June 6th. So that's kind of an important metric. Access providers, we have about 50 access providers that are signed up and showing growth curves that will actually mean that they will have 1% of their traffic hitting those websites over IPv6 by the 6th of June. This is not slideware. This is IPv6 deployed for real. And then we have equipment vendors, home router vendors, who are committed to actually having IPv6 throughout the majority of their product line and turned on by default by the 6th of June. So what does the world look like after the 6th of June? Well, we will have actual honest-to-goodness IPv6 in the traffic in the world. It's not going to be a lot. It's still going to be infinitesimal compared to IPv4. I'm not expecting to see the magic 15 or 20% of the world's traffic suddenly over IPv6, and we know that we've hit the knee in the graph, and the network effect will take us the rest of the way home. But at that point, some companies will be able to say that IPv6 is business as usual. And we know from our discussions with various providers around the world that there are a number of other access providers, content providers that are working to get to IPv6 who now know and believe that they see their competitors moving. They now know and believe that they have to move. They just aren't going to make the 6th of June. They might make it in the next 6 months. So I don't want to be a Pollyanna. I don't want to be unduly optimistic. I don't want to say we're done, not by a long stretch. But I think it's very important to note that the 6th of June is really a landmark in terms of V6 deployment, because it is going to be the beginning of the new normal. And goodness knows we need it. Because by contrast, if we let IPv4 run out and don't manage to move to IPv6, we're in a world of hurt. Part of the problem with network address translators is that they can only accommodate known systems. So you can punch a hole in your NAT for a game that you have access to, right? So if you have control over your NAT, you can punch holes through it at will. If that NAT is in the middle of the network somewhere, which is what large-scale NATs are, you don't have control over it. And the large-scale NAT that's going to be living in the middle of your service provider's network is going to have been designed to accommodate all known games, software applications, blah, blah, blah. That's great, but what have we just been seeing about the power of permissionless innovation and the things we haven't yet thought of? That's what is challenged and threatened by having a large-scale NAT sitting in the middle of a network. So we see that this really creates a challenging situation if we don't deal with IPv4 run out and we just say V6 was a bad idea, let's not bother. An interesting thing is that that outcome would actually be saying IPv4 in fact is the permanent favorite. And as we've seen, the internet is not something that does well in trying to hang on to permanent favorites. Rather, this is what works today, doesn't seem to work today, out with the old, in with the new. And unless IPv4 really is the last packet format you ever want to deal with, and the best packet format you think that we'll ever be able to create, then I think that we need to agree it's time to move on. And again, sort of projecting out 20 years from now, where would we be without IPv6? We might have an open internet, but open in the sense of, you can connect to existing bits of it, such as it is. It would still be a building block technology, but a lot of that collaboration, global reach and integrity, and permissionless innovation, gone. So I think it's valuable to look back at all the power of people and what they have done with the internet over the years. We see very strong markers in terms of IPv6 deployment. I'm actually pretty optimistic that we can get over this hump, and I just want you to think of this in terms of this is why it matters. This is a fire that is actually worth all of us throwing ourselves on and putting out. But moving on and thinking sort of creatively and maybe providing a bit of symmetry to this week, if you were in the plenary session on Monday and saw the EVE Online talk with the exciting videos and whatnot, when asked, the answer was not the thing I most want in the world is IPv6, sadly. The thing that was most wanted in the world was essentially end-to-end quality of service for over-the-top services. This is one of those things that I have to say causes my gut to clench just a little bit. But I think in part, to be honest, it's a question of I get nervous when people say that that's what they want because I can think of all the wrong ways that could be implemented. It would be a challenge to everything that we've been talking about today if that was implemented in a way that essentially, if you wanted to have a slice of that a slice of that performance, you would have to pay to play. So new entrants would basically have to be able to pay to get that kind of over-the-top quality of service guarantee if they wanted to develop and deploy a new service, because that's barring new entrants. It would be wrong if it was essentially built out as a completely proprietary system, because all of a sudden you don't have building blocks anymore. And you can't take the internet to the next level because you've enshrined some kind of proprietary system. There's an interesting impact in terms of collaboration between networks. If you do it in a way that says not just, well, here comes a packet from such and such source and it's expecting to get this kind of treatment, but rather say, here comes this packet and you have to drop all other packets because this is a golden packet and you're going to let it through, you're doing things that actually break the sovereign nature of each network that participates in the internet in that collaboration. Yeah, so there's also the possibility that doing it the wrong way, you could essentially be creating a world where the whole internet becomes one big walled garden, and I thought that was what we were trying to break out of. But that doesn't mean that there is no future with better quality of service for applications and over-the-top services. I don't know what it is, sadly. And I would say if I did, it would make me rich, except that if you do things in open standards, that's one thing that isn't a natural consequence. But if we had a way to do that that actually was based on open standards so that it could actually be evolved, could be available to all, and framed those requests, again, not in terms of here's a golden packet, drop everything else, but found a way to express it in terms of I'm willing to pay you if you provide this level of service for me, which is in essence what the congestion exposure work in the IETF is looking at now. If we do it in a way that allows having smart edges as opposed to trying to create a very intelligent middle, and certainly in a way that allows no permanent favorites, then maybe EVE Online will be able to have a future with the kind of quality of service that they're looking for. But this is a case where really it's an important question as to not whether we look at quality of service and better than best effort end-to-end, but how we look at it. And the choices that we make are the ones that are going to frame the future. So, a couple of parting thoughts. 40 years ago, the internet was an idea and, some hand-drawn diagrams. 20 years ago, the internet was a pretty well-elaborated research network that was just beginning to see the passage of commercial traffic. Today, the internet is really a vibrant, high-bandwidth component of what we do every day and how we get on in our lives. And the reason that we've been able to see it grow quite so explosively in the last 40 years really is in a large part because we've managed to evolve the internet and the systems that run on it in ways that respect those invariant properties. And I think it's important to know, really, when we think about it, that in 10 years, the next 5 billion people are going to be online. And they're going to be building the systems that are the successors to Facebook and whatever else. The decisions and actions that we make today, the choices that we make to preserve the internet and these invariant properties are the ones that are going to either set it up for them to help them continue to innovate this massive global experiment, or say, this was an interesting period in history, read about it in textbooks, because we're back to textbooks. But rather, let's make the right choices today, and let's see where we can take this internet thing in the next 10 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie, for this nice, inspiring talk. We have definitely time for some questions, so please. Okay, there is one.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. But you've been talking about domain names, how they are important, and how they actually make together World Wide Web, the internet as we know now, or maybe as we have known until now. But what is becoming, what is changing, I think, internet, is that I can see that many companies see that unless they are on Facebook, they don't exist. And therefore, it looks like, well, right now it's in parallel, yes?
Right.
You have your website and you have your Facebook website. But maybe we are going towards the way where instead of all this World Wide Web, we will just have Facebook and no domain names, just names under the facebook.com.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and thanks for framing it that way. So on the one hand, maybe that is the way it's going to go, and I think the domain name system is an interesting system. I think there are a lot of interesting things to understand in why it has worked so well and survived so long, but it too could go. You know, no permanent favorites. DNS, out the door, maybe. And certainly it's likely to go away in terms of, you know, the pimples.com corporate visibility as you're describing. Is its successor Facebook? Well, maybe it is, and I certainly understand that that's very important and popular now, but I mean, it's a curious question. Do you think that the future of the internet is best served if the entirety of people's experience of it rests on one closed system and in the hands of one corporate board? I suspect not. I suspect that we probably want to make sure that there are other ways to do this, other ways to support this, other systems that can compete with it. And I think that this leads fairly directly into a lot of what concerns privacy advocates and people who look at, you know, what's happening with cloud services. Very useful, but how do I pull out, you know, the value that is mine and move it somewhere else? How do I have mobility? So yes, I think that there is a trend towards using Facebook and or other systems than the DNS to express corporate reality on the internet. I'm not worried about what that means for the DNS because I don't work for a DNS company anymore. But I don't know that I think that Facebook is the answer because it is closed and it isn't going to give you that, you know, your future in 20 years is very much dependent on what a private board decides. Okay, another one over there. I don't know if you
Yes, please.
Yes, I would like to ask you a question on, you said about the end-to-end quality of service and so forth. The research and education networking community was blessed with over-provisioning. Do you think that over-provisioning is a politically correct way of resolving the end-to-end quality of service? Would that apply all the way to wireless last miles and so forth, or is it something, a luxury that end-rents enjoy right now?
Thank you for not asking what about BitTorrent. So I think that over-provisioning, well, over-provisioning is already a subjective statement. I think that having lots of bandwidth is currently useful, but isn't actually the entirety of the answer. I think that we have to respect that we need better ways of using the bandwidth that we have. One of the things that has surprised people who are provisioning networks was the sudden use of more video as upload, as people, you know, got on Facebook and started uploading videos of their cats, for instance. That wasn't a direction they were expecting. You know, the whole Skyping and doing video chats with your grandkids, not a direction that was expected when originally provisioning some end networks. So I don't think it's a question of over-provisioning is the politically correct way to do things. I think it is a question of making sure that we develop ways to use bandwidth well. To the question of wireless, I think that there is, I don't think wireless, if wireless services are offering internet access or actual internet connection, I think that they need to be treated in the same way as landline in terms of expectation of open passage of packets. And I realize that, you know, there are a lot of different constraints in the wireless world, everything from, you know, power consumption to expected bandwidth and expected, you know, tearing down and setting up of sessions. But I think rather than saying we should provision them differently or allow them to use different network management characteristics because they're a wireless network, globally we should be coming up with better ways to accommodate that as part of the expectation of bandwidth management.
Thanks, Leslie. Very thought-provoking. One of the thoughts it's provoked with me is we're always being taught about the network effect, which promotes huge monopolies, and the internet is supposed to be the prime example of the network effect. So how on earth has it not created a single favorite? Despite the network effect, somebody always seems to invent something new.
Well, I think the network effect is always, it's one wave, right? And there's another wave behind it, and that's what we saw with the evolution of search engines, from Archie to AltaVista to Google and so on, and another could come along. And that's really important. I think we don't yet have an understanding of just how much power there is in all the people using the internet. And I'm afraid you're going to cause me to talk more about Ravelry. So Ravelry was the knitting social network that I mentioned. One of the things that is really fascinating about it is that they've harnessed people to create a global database of yarns and knitting patterns. And it's just kind of fascinating because you've probably worked with trying to manage and update databases at some point, and you know that data integrity is a bear. Well, it turns out if you have 2 million people who are working with you to just update the ones that they know, you can do a lot. So at one point, they wanted to change the indexing and the metadata around patterns, and they called on people to say, if each of you do 3 patterns, then we can get through this in a month. Well, I think they had the entire database of some 100,000 patterns reindexed so metadata recreated for it in less than 3 days because they tapped into 1 million people who were dedicated and interested. This is not the sort of thing that we think about in terms of trying to figure out what energy there is. And I think that's in part why the network effect keeps surprising us and monopolies keep tumbling, is because people are a lot more powerful than we give them credit.
Some more questions for Leslie? I'm sorry, but this light is actually preventing me from seeing you, so.
No, I don't think so.
If not, let me invite you to thank again our keynote.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I need this. Okay. Yeah, these Madonna style mics, I'm not going to dance. Sorry. Not this time, not ever. So we are waiting for some slides to appear. They are unusually, interestingly titled Closing Notes. But it is my real privilege to say a few last words regarding the conference and, of course, say a few thank yous. As you know, TNC's annual event organized by Terena, and this year it has been hosted by RHNet, that is the Icelandic NRN, and the University of Iceland, and support was provided by the Congress Reykjavik. As you may not know, this is the biggest ever TNC, and we just finished counting, and it is 611 participants. That is a record. And streaming was watched by a total of 800 visits from 61 countries. And the local wireless network also had its record. It was 602 simultaneous VLAN connections, out of which 452 were eduroamers. So this eduroam thingy seems to be taking off the ground quite well. More interestingly, this year's conference was subtitled Networking to Services, and in pulling that trick together, the program committee was helped by 134 speakers in 4 plenaries and 32 sessions. We had a number of side meetings, workshops, BOFs, demonstrations, even in situations in which the rooms were not good enough or not sized enough to host all of the meetings and all of the people who wanted to be there. I think this is the size, this is the matter of success. This shows the great interest that, and although we are in a nice and beautiful country, you choose to be here, not visiting nice places all around, and that is commendable for the conference. The next item actually is some awarding. As almost a tradition, we have a Best Student Poster Award that is sponsored this year by Cisco and Internet Society. So I would like to invite Chris Lonwick from Cisco and Karen O'Donoghue from Internet Society to say a few words and award the winner.
Hi, I'm Chris Lonwick, Director of Research and Advanced Development for Cisco Systems. This is, as probably most of you know, this is our 4th year for sponsoring students to come here and be a part of this wonderful gathering. This is the 3rd year that we've had a student poster competition, and with us this year is the Internet Society.
And the Internet Society is pleased to join Cisco this year in helping to sponsor this event. I've heard a number of times this week about that we are an aging community, and we're really interested in, the Internet Society is interested in the next generation of Internet leaders and innovators. So we are excited to be participating.
So let's, hopefully y'all have seen the posters that the students have brought. Hopefully you got a chance to talk to them as well. Can we have the students stand up? And sure enough, the lights are really bright right here. But join me, everyone, give them a round of applause. Thanks. It took us a while to come to conclusion on what the winner was. We were looking for some originality, some good research that would resonate with the community here, and we finally came up with a winner.
So the winner of this year's student contest is Jorge Somavilla from the Technical University of Madrid. Thank you.
Yep. Good. Hopefully he's coming. And this year, let's see. If you remember, in years past, we've had the the Cisco Flip video. Well, Cisco is no longer making that. They didn't ask my opinion, but we've got instead a Kindle Fire for Jorge. As soon as he gets here. All right. If he's not here, I'm keeping it to myself.
Oh, here he comes.
Oh, here he comes. All right. And then we got to take pictures. Hang on, folks. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay. Yep. We got pictures. Yep.
Thank you. And actually what we had was something like 10 student posters, if you are wondering how many of those were in the contest. The next thing, Terena wants to specially recognize somebody for sharing an idea. And now I'm going to invite the Terena president, Mr. Pierre Bruyère, to say a few words and explain what is behind this part.
Thank you, Miro. So, I suppose you have seen some blue balloons there with an eduroam logo. And before I really get started, I will try to make a short survey. So please put your hand up if you are an idiom user. Yeah, nearly everybody. So, perfect. 10 years ago, there was no idiom. Users traveling between institutions at the inconvenience of no network connection, or at the best the hassle of requesting special access. And now we have idiom in more than 50 countries around the world. In the European Confederation alone, there are more than 5,000 locations where users with idiom credential can securely access the network without any special access request being necessary. And not only does this benefit researchers, students, and professors, but it also reduces the support burden for institutions, making it very simple and transparent to provide access for visiting users. And hundreds of institutions now own and operate the idiom service infrastructure, participating in this very large collaborative effort coordinated nationally by the national roaming operators. There is also ongoing collaboration too in GEAN project and in TRENA activities, and to continue the development of the idiom technology and service. On a global level, there is also collaboration in the Global idiom Governance Committee that was established last year, with today more than 5 world regions participating in the development of the standards. So, idiom is first and foremost a collaborative effort. It was pioneered by the European Research and Education Networking Community, primarily through the TRENA Task Force on Mobility, and many of our friends and colleagues who participated to the development of the technology, of the idiom technology, are, I suppose, probably here. So first, let's give a round of applause, please, for all of their contribution over the last 10 years. But even more than celebrating 10 years of idiom thought, we want to celebrate the community spirit that helped to build these global services. And community collaboration begins with somebody shares an idea. On 30th May, 10 years ago, an email suggesting a wireless roaming services for research and education was sent to the TF Mobility mailing list. An idea was shared. The rest is only idiom history. The man who sent that mail is Klaas Wieringa. So please, Klaas, could you come up on stage? Klaas, on behalf of the TRENA community, it's my pleasure to give you this present. Thank you very much.
Can I show you?
Yes, you can do something and you have to open it. Right?
Okay. And can I ask you to open it and do it?
Right. Maybe.
To avoid your doubts, I'm asking Klaas to show his present.
First of all, thank you, of course. I do want to screw up the schedule a little bit by saying a few words. Pierre already mentioned this, but I really want to emphasize something. You know all this. You know this expression, standing on the shoulder of giants. I really feel that many giants are standing on my shoulders, and I hope it doesn't show too much. But I do want to recognize, and I'm happy to take the credit for having the original idea, but this is really an effort that is carried out by hundreds of people, and that is still under development. Today or tomorrow, RFC 6613 and 14 specifying ROTSEC will be published, thanks to the great work of Stefan Winter and others in the Xeon project. Miro did a great job at turning Eduroam from a crazy idea, from somebody that has ideas but doesn't know how to follow them through to a real product, into something really useful for people. All those people that in those early days thought this was actually a good idea and worked with those, and many of those are here. I've heard that some of them are also remotely participating. So I'm happy to be the figurehead for that, but really the thanks go out to all those people. Thank you.
Thank you, Cas. I think one of the major values of Terena is just this: the ability to provide a framework, a kind of incubator where a new idea can emerge and then be developed to a final services. Terena is not only an organization, it's a community. Terena, it's you. You are Terena, so we need your input. And so please, I will encourage you today to continue to put your ideas on the mailing list. And so don't be shy, we need you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre. Yeah, the time for final thank yous. First, for this interesting and exciting program, to the program committee of 2000 and TNC 2012, chaired by David Kelsey. Thank you, guys. There is no good program without the speakers and session chairs. Some of those spend a lot of time in preparing their talks, and I'd like to thank them personally. Thank you, guys. That was an excellent job. In particular, the thanks goes to the plenary speakers in the order of appearance: Hilmar Pettersson, Geoff Houston, Nicole Harris, Jan-Martin Lovendahl, Jacob Appelbaum, and finally Leslie Daigle. Thank you. And of course, nothing happens without you, the conference participants. Thank you all. Still, there are some people who made this happen. I'd like first to invite the representative of our hosts, RHNet and University of Iceland, to come to the stage and get a small thing as a token of our appreciations and thanks from the community for the nice job done. Thank you very much. Nevertheless, one has to recognize the teams, the people who were behind the scenes or in front of us, but still working in order that we have a good program and joyful conference. So, yeah, you know one thing, this job of mine, it's sometimes very hard. So now I'm going to pronounce some Icelandic names, and I'm going to make mistakes. So, you know, don't smile too much to me. It's not easy. The networking and technical assistance team consists of the people from RHNet, University of Iceland, and Reykjavik University. So guys, could you please stand up so everybody sees you? And I'd like to invite Ingemar Jonsson, Jon Ingi Einarsson, and Finnur Torgersen to come here and get the presents for the team. Further on, this local team has been helped by the NordUnet team, headed by Eric Kiekenborg. Eric, are you here? Could you please come? We are here with inside the, and very interesting, I would say impressive, University Cinema Theater. And their team also helped us a lot. So I'd like to invite Torvald Kolbens to come here for a present. Tori, are you here? Thank you. Thank you. Our PDO this year was Congress Reykjavik, headed by Lara Petursdottir and her team. Could you please come? Thank you very much. And as usual, for the last time, for the last several conferences, we do have student interviews, people who are trying to pick up interesting speakers and topics, ideas, news items for the community to share with. And I'd like to invite, and now I'm really troubled, Valgedur Anna Johansdottir as the head of the team to come and accept a small gift as a show of our appreciation. Anna, are you here? She's not. So we have a substitute head. Working at the same time. Yes, and all this would not ever happen without the Terena Secretariat. Either those who are here with us or those who are back in the office in Amsterdam still working regarding the conference. Thank you, guys. And there is a special thanks from my side, and my job is much easier because of one person, and I presume that you already know who it is. Thank you, Jonji, for being an excellent asset to the TNCs. Thank you. Some final thanks. Some final thanks
Maybe
to sponsors. No.
You forget something.
No, not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Are you sure?
I'm absolutely sure. Final thanks to the sponsors. Yeah, because all the closings are improvisation, two are missed, so my apologies to the city of Reykjavik and the local label supplier. You will be there. I apologize, but this is the fact of life, improvisation and the closing. Thank you, sponsors. And yes, Mr. President wants to say something, but I will stop him. I will be unpolite.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I have to interrupt you. Because you really forget somebody.
Yeah.
It's you, Milo. In the list. Okay. You know that following the Terena rules, you can only have 2 mandates of 3 years. And it's the last year for Miro, in just finishing his mandate now with this conference. So and I suppose you will follow me on that, he did a tremendous job. You just have to look at the figures, the number of participants, and we are reaching the top level today, but also the quality and the quantity of the presentation. They have raised a very good level. So, Miro, I want to thank you on behalf of all the community, because you were fantastic, and it will be very difficult to replace you in Terena. Thank you.
You see, we are it must be a book. Thank you. It must be a book, but I think I have to explain what is on the slides. I was elected, and I wanted to say before the president, but as I said, this is closing this. We improvise a lot. I was elected in Catania, and that is near one volcano, and I'm ending volcanic career now in Iceland, and I do hope my successor will continue, not in volcanic areas. Thank you again. And as the life goes on, there will be TNC 2013 in June in Maastricht, the Netherlands, hosted by SURFNet. And before I give the floor to the SURFNet representative, let me introduce the program committee for the 2013 that will be chaired by David Foster from CERN. And now I'd like to invite Kes Nigers, as a representative of SURFNet, to introduce us and invite us to Maastricht. Kes.
Thank you, Miro. Trena, of course, has its secretariat in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands have been kind of TNC host organizers of last resort for many, many years. So that was a type of security measure. Unfortunately, TNC was so successful and so popular, we never got a chance to organize one. And so we entered the competition and we issued a proposal, and we are very pleased that Trena has accepted our proposal to organize the TNC next year. And of course, we do realize that it is a real challenge after what happened in this conference this year and over the last couple of years. But we are very pleased to invite you because also SURFNet will celebrate its 25th anniversary next year. And we wanted to combine that together with all of you, and hopefully we will reach again over 600 participants next year. So Maastricht is a city pretty much in the center of Europe. It's actually as close to Brussels and Düsseldorf and Eindhoven, even closer than Schiphol Airport, so you can reach it from many destinations, and that's up to you. But we really look forward to all of you, and there's a small introduction movie that I will start now, and hopefully I will see all of you next year in Maastricht.
SURFNet and Trena proudly present TNC 2013. This is the first Trena networking conference to be held in the Netherlands, the home of SURFNet and Trena. We would like to invite you to Maastricht. The treaty, signed in Maastricht on February the 7th, 1992, has made the city famous as the birthplace of the European Union and the single European currency, the euro. The treaty has made Maastricht a symbol for Europe. The city is also renowned for its history and culture, and it has a large and growing international student population. SURFNet ensures that students, instructors and researchers can work together simply and effectively with the aid of ICT. SURFNet links ICT services, scientific instruments and people with a reliable network and collaboration infrastructure. SURFNet also demonstrates what is possible by developing and testing innovative ICT services. SURFNet connects institutions in the Netherlands and the rest of the world via Netherlight, AM6 and the Xeon network. SURFNet has been a leader in the field of networks for 25 years now. SURFNet 7, for example, is one of the most advanced networks in the world, and we are currently working to achieve our aim of creating an open collaboration infrastructure, SURFConnext. SURFNet believes it's very important to collaborate and share knowledge within the NREN community to upgrade education and research worldwide. Therefore, we are happy to invite you to our 25th anniversary. We look forward to seeing you in Maastricht in 2013.
Okay, thank you all. We have been proud to be part of the birth of EduRoam, and this is of course an invisible thing that helps us all. But to remind you, for the conference details for next year, we have presented a QR code that we will hand out to you at the exit of this meeting room. And please copy the QR code and then enjoy what's inside it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kees. This really is the end. Have a safe trip home. Enjoy your working time and hope to see you next year in Maastricht. And by the way, fill in the evaluation forms. Note there is no lunch. Conference is finished. Thank you.